47 minutes. That's how long Emily Johnson had been sitting alone at a table for two at Élysée, the most expensive restaurant in the city. 47 minutes of pretending to read the wine list, of checking her phone for a message that wasn't there, of feeling the slow, crushing weight of 100 pitying glances. Her makeup was perfect, a careful application of confidence she didn't feel. The sapphire blue dress, a splurge she'd justified for what she believed would be the most important night of her life, hugged her body with an elegance that felt like a cruel joke. Her hands, however, were traitors, trembling in her lap as she ignored the sympathetic eyes of a couple at a nearby table. Tonight was supposed to be it. The culmination of 3 years with Marcus, a comfortable, if lukewarm relationship that had become the steady, predictable rhythm of her life. She had imagined a velvet box appearing beside the dessert, a bended knee, a future finally clicking into place. Her phone vibrated on the pristine white tablecloth. Her heart leaped with a desperate, foolish hope. It wasn't a message saying he was stuck in traffic. It was an execution. "Sorry, Em. I can't do this anymore. You deserve more than I can give. Don't wait for me." The words blurred, the screen a watery mess as the tears she'd been holding back threatened to stage a public mutiny. He had ended 3 years of her life with a text message. While she was sitting here, dressed for a proposal, he had severed their future with a coward's farewell. "Ma'am." The waiter's voice was gentle, but it felt like an accusation. It was the 3rd time he had approached, his expression a painful mixture of professional courtesy and deep discomfort. "Will you be ordering this evening?" Every eye in the restaurant seemed to be on her. She was a spectacle, the girl who got stood up, the fool in the pretty blue dress. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on her chest, making it impossible to breathe. "No," she managed to whisper, her voice cracking. "I'll be leaving." She grabbed her handbag, her only thought to flee, to disappear into the anonymous city streets and let the heartbreak consume her in private. But as she stood, a figure materialized beside her table, blocking her escape. A tall, impossibly handsome man in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been woven onto his body. He was holding 2 flutes of champagne, their bubbles catching the light like captured stars. "Sorry I'm late, darling," he said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Then he leaned in closer, his presence radiating a warmth that pushed back the encroaching chill of her shame. His whisper was a secret, a conspiracy just for her. "Play along," he murmured, his eyes, the color of a deep forest green, locking onto hers. "You don't deserve this humiliation." Before she could process the sheer audacity of the moment, Anthony Sinclair, though she didn't know his name yet, had slid into the seat opposite her. He placed a glass in front of her, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting electric second. He raised his own glass, his intense gaze never leaving her face. "He's going to regret losing you," he said, not with the empty platitude of a stranger, but with a quiet, searing conviction that made her shattered heart skip a beat. Without waiting for her response, he caught the waiter's eye. "We'll have the tasting menu for 2, he announced, his voice calm and commanding. "And keep the champagne coming." He turned back to her, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Let's show this restaurant you don't need anyone to shine." Emily stared at him, caught in a dizzying whirlwind of shock, confusion, and a tiny flickering spark of something she hadn't felt all night. Hope. She didn't know if she should laugh or cry or run for the hills. But one thing was certain. Her life had just taken a turn she could never have imagined. Chapter 2. A Stranger, a Night, 1,000 Questions. The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops that looked more like art than food. Emily had been moving through the motions in a daze, sipping the champagne, nodding, allowing this magnetic stranger to orchestrate the evening. But as the waiter departed, leaving them in their bubble of borrowed intimacy, her voice finally returned. "Do you always rescue abandoned women in expensive restaurants?" she asked, the words coming out as a shaky whisper. Anthony paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his handsome, severe features into something warm and approachable. It wasn't a polite smile. It was real. "No," he admitted, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "But there was something in your eyes. You weren't just sad. You were defiant. It made me want to see what you would do next." The raw honesty in his voice disarmed her completely. The wall of shame she had built around herself began to crumble. For the rest of the dinner, a strange and wonderful thing happened. They talked. It flowed with the ease of old friends catching up after years apart. Anthony, she noticed, was a master of conversation. He revealed almost nothing about himself. When she asked what he did, he gave a vague, dismissive answer. "I'm in the business of building things." But he was an expert at drawing her out. He asked about the classic novel she was teaching, about the funny thing a student had said that week, about her long-held secret dream of writing a children's book. He listened with an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply flattering. There was no phone on the table, no distracted glances around the room. When she spoke, his focus was absolute, making her feel as if her small, ordinary life was the most fascinating story he had ever heard. For the first time in 3 years, she felt truly, completely seen. The chemistry between them was a low, electric hum, a palpable current that charged the air. When the ridiculously expensive bill arrived, Emily's sense of reality returned. "We have to split this," she insisted, already calculating the damage to her teacher's salary. Anthony simply waved a hand, a gesture of effortless dismissal. "Tonight is on me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Outside, the cool night air felt like a splash of cold water. A sleek black limousine was waiting at the curb, its engine purring silently. A uniformed driver stepped out, opening the rear door. "Good evening, Mr. Sinclair," the driver said respectfully. Sinclair. The name echoed in Emily's mind. As Anthony was speaking quietly with the driver, she pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen in a sudden, desperate need for answers. The search results loaded, and the screen's glow illuminated her face as it turned deathly pale. Anthony Sinclair wasn't just in the business of building things. He was the billionaire CEO of Sinclair Enterprises, a global corporation whose logo was on half the buildings in the city. He wasn't just rich, he was a titan. A man who had been trending on financial news sites last week for closing a $2 billion acquisition. He turned back to her, his smile fading as he saw the look on her face. The shift in her expression was unmistakable. "You found out," he stated, his voice calm, but a flicker of something. Disappointment, resignation, crossed his features. He took a step closer. "So what now? Are you going to run away because I have money?" Emily was speechless, her mind reeling. She felt intimidated, out of her depth, like a guppy that had accidentally swum into a shark tank. Before she could stammer a reply, he extended his hand, his palm open in a gesture of invitation. "Don't let the night end like this," he said, his voice dropping to a low, persuasive murmur. "Come with me. Just for one more hour. If you hate it, I promise you'll never hear from me again." Emily stared at his outstretched hand, then up at his intense, searching eyes. Every rational thought in her head was screaming at her to run, to go home, to retreat to the safety of her predictable life. But her heart, still bruised but now beating with a wild, unfamiliar rhythm, was telling her to take the risk. She looked at his hand, knowing that this single choice could change everything. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, a smooth, swift climb that felt like a departure from the known world. When the doors opened directly into his penthouse, Emily stepped out into a space that was less an apartment and more a kingdom in the sky. 40 stories above the city, walls of glass revealed a breathtaking, glittering panorama of lights that seemed to stretch into infinity. She clutched a wine glass, poured from a bottle she was sure cost more than her monthly rent, and walked on to the sprawling terrace. The wind was cool against her heated skin, a whisper of reality in this impossible dream. What am I doing here? The thought was a frantic, repeating drumbeat in her mind. This was a world of power and wealth she couldn't comprehend, and she was a literature teacher whose biggest recent excitement had been a first-edition copy of Jane Eyre. Anthony stood beside her, yet he maintained a respectful distance, as if sensing her need for space. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at her. And in the soft glow of the city lights, she saw it for the first time, a profound, aching loneliness in his eyes, a solitude that mirrored the hollow space in her own chest. "It's a great view," he said, his voice a low murmur beside her. "But it gets quiet up here." The admission hung in the air, a quiet confession. Spurred by a strange, newfound courage, Emily turned to him. "Is this what you do? Bring women you rescue to your giant, empty apartment?" He flinched, just slightly, but the hurt in his eyes was real. "No," he said, his voice raw. "I don't bring anyone here." He took a breath, the carefully composed mask of the CEO slipping away to reveal the man beneath. "I built this empire from nothing after my parents died. It was all I had. But the bigger it got, the more people saw me as a commodity." A solution, a stepping stone. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. You looked at me tonight, even after you knew who I was, and I could see the question in your eyes. Not, what can he do for me, but who is he? He shook his head, looking out at the city. "You're the first person in years who didn't look at me and see dollar signs." His vulnerability was a key, unlocking her own. Touched by his honesty, she found herself sharing her own pain. The quiet erosion of her self-worth with Marcus, the feeling of being perpetually overlooked, of her dreams being treated as quaint, childish hobbies. They weren't a billionaire and a teacher anymore. They were just two lonely souls, sharing their scars under a blanket of stars. The space between them dwindled, the air growing thick and heavy with unspoken desire. He lifted a hand, his fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was feather-light, but it sent a shiver down her spine. The moment was perfect, the tension unbearable. He began to lean in, his eyes fixed on her lips. This was it. And then, a shrill, demanding ringtone shattered the spell. Anthony's entire body tensed. He pulled back, a look of pure, unadulterated frustration flashing across his face. He glanced at the screen, and the CEO mask slammed back into place. "I have to take this," he said, his voice tight. Emily watched as he turned away, his tone shifting to one of sharp, clipped command. The magical, intimate bubble had burst. She felt a familiar pang of disappointment. "I should go," she said softly when he hung up. "No, wait," he started, but she was already moving toward the door, the spell broken. "It's okay," she said, forcing a smile. "Reality calls, for both of us. I need to process all of this." He looked panicked, a desperate edge to his eyes that she hadn't seen before, as if he feared she would dematerialize the second she walked out the door. He followed her to the elevator, his hand hovering near her arm, not quite touching. "Let my driver take you," he offered. "No, thank you," she insisted gently. "I think I need the subway ride. I need to feel the ground again." He understood. At the door, as the elevator arrived with a soft chime, he reached out and his fingers curled gently around her wrist. His touch was warm, a silent plea. "Can I see you again?" he asked, his voice urgent. "Tomorrow?" Her mind screamed, no. It was too much, too fast, too different. But her heart, that foolish, traitorous organ, betrayed her. The look in his eyes, a raw mixture of hope and fear, made it impossible to refuse him completely. "Maybe," she whispered, and slipped into the elevator before she could take it back. As the doors slid shut, sealing her off from his intense gaze, A sudden, cold realization hit her. He had never asked for her number. How could they possibly see each other again? Was it just a polite dismissal? Or had the all-powerful CEO, for the first time in his life, forgotten to close the deal? Emily woke up to the insistent buzzing of her phone, her heart giving a hopeful, ridiculous leap. Anthony? But a glance at the screen sent a wave of cold dread through her. 47 unread messages. Not from a mysterious billionaire, but from the ghost of her past. They were all from Marcus, a frantic, pathetic deluge of digital regret. I made a mistake. Please, Em, forgive me. I need to see you. And then, the one that made her blood run cold. I saw pictures of you with some guy on social media. Who is he? She scrolled through the messages, a strange detachment settling over her. She felt a flicker of anger at his audacity, a flash of irritation at his possessiveness, but the soul-crushing sadness she expected to feel was simply gone. It was a hollow space. She realized with a jolt of shock that one night with Anthony Sinclair, one night of being truly seen, had done more to erase Marcus from her heart than 3 years of lukewarm affection had done to imprint him there. At the high school where she taught, the day was a blur. She moved through her literature classes on autopilot, her mind replaying every moment from the night before. Her teacher friends, having already seen the blurry paparazzi photos that were now circulating online, ambushed her in the faculty lounge. "Spill it, Johnson," her friend Sarah demanded, waving her phone. "Who is the mystery man? He looks like he stepped out of a James Bond movie." Emily tried to downplay it, to dismiss it as a strange, one-time event. But she couldn't suppress the small, secret smile that kept tugging at her lips whenever she thought of him. During her free period, she returned to her classroom to find a sleek, black envelope resting on her desk. Her name was written across the front in elegant, masculine script. Her heart began to hammer. Inside were 2 VIP tickets to the city's most exclusive modern art exhibition, the very one she had told Anthony she had been dreaming of seeing. Tucked inside was a small, thick card. For the woman who makes the world feel colorful again. Anthony. He hadn't forgotten. He had found her. The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly attuned to their conversation, it made her breath catch. That evening, she went to the gallery, her nerves a tangled mess of excitement and fear. She told herself she was going for the art, but she scanned the crowd with a desperate hope. And then she saw him. Her stomach plummeted to the floor. He wasn't alone. A stunningly beautiful woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a dress that cost more than Emily's car was clinging to his arm, laughing at something he'd said, her touch proprietary and intimate. It was all a lie, the thought screamed in her head. You were a diversion, a charity case. Humiliation, cold and sharp, washed over her. She was about to turn and flee, to disappear before he could see her, but it was too late. His eyes met hers across the crowded room. The genuine, unadulterated joy that lit up his face was unmistakable. It was real. But the woman at his side saw his reaction, and her gaze flickered to Emily, her expression instantly shifting to one of cool, territorial assessment. Anthony immediately excused himself from the woman. Emily heard him call her Victoria, and strode toward her, his path direct and purposeful. "Emily, you came," he said, his smile so bright it could have lit up the room. But all Emily could feel was the sting of confusion and hurt. "I'm sorry," she stammered, taking a step back. I didn't realize you were with someone." He was about to explain, his expression turning serious, when a hand clamped down on Emily's arm, hard. "We need to talk. Now." Marcus. He stood there, his face a mask of righteous anger, his grip like a manacle on her arm. The shift in Anthony was instantaneous and terrifying. The charming, smiling man vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. He took a protective step forward, placing himself between Emily and her ex, his eyes darkening to a shade of green as stormy as the sea. "She's not going anywhere with you." "Take your hands off her." Anthony's voice was low, a quiet, dangerous command that held more menace than a shout ever could. The air in the polished art gallery crackled with tension. Marcus, though clearly intimidated by the sheer force of Anthony's presence, held his ground, his grip on Emily's arm tightening. "Who do you think you are?" Marcus snarled, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and wounded pride. "I've known her for 3 years!" Anthony took another deliberate step forward, his shadow falling over them both. "And in one night," he countered, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "I've learned what you failed to see in 3 years." A small crowd had begun to form, their whispers a low hum of intrigued gossip. This was a scene far more interesting than any painting on the walls. Emily felt a surge of a familiar, suffocating humiliation. But this time, something was different. It was mixed with a hot, clarifying anger. She wrenched her arm from Marcus's grasp. The sudden, forceful movement surprised both men. She turned to face Marcus, her eyes, once full of tears for him, now blazing with a fire he had never seen. "You're right. You've known me for 3 years," she said, her voice shaking but clear, commanding the space around her. 3 years of you canceling plans for your friends. 3 years of you calling my passion for literature cute. 3 years of you making me feel like my dreams were small and my feelings were an inconvenience. She took a breath, the words pouring out, each one a stone she was finally unburdening from her heart. "You didn't leave me at that restaurant, Marcus. You set me free." He stood there, stunned into silence, his justifications dying on his lips. Without another glance at him, Emily turned and walked toward the exit, her back straight, her head held high. Anthony followed a half-step behind, a silent, formidable guard. He left Marcus standing alone in the middle of the gallery, a relic of a past she had just publicly disowned. He didn't even spare a glance for Victoria, who had watched the entire exchange with a cool, calculating interest. Outside, the city air was a balm on Emily's heated skin. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer, liberating power of finally speaking her truth. "Are you all right?" Anthony asked, his voice gentle again, the dangerous edge completely gone. "I am," she said, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. "I think I'm better than all right." He stopped her on the sidewalk, his expression serious. "About Victoria," he began quickly, as if desperate to clear the air. "She's my vice president of operations. It was a business event, but—" He hesitated, then plunged forward with raw honesty. "She has made it clear she wants more. I do not." Emily let out a nervous laugh, feeling the absurdity of the situation. "Why are you explaining this to me? We barely know each other." He stepped closer, taking both of her hands in his. His touch was warm, grounding. "Because you're worth explaining it to," he said simply, his gaze intense and unwavering. "Because I don't want you to think for 1 second that last night wasn't real." The sincerity in his eyes was a tidal wave, washing away the last of her doubts. He wanted to see her again. He wanted this to be real. "Okay," she said, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. "Then let's go on a date. A real one." A brilliant smile broke across his face. "Name the time and place. Élysée is already booked for you for the next month." She laughed, shaking her head. "No, no more limousines, no 5-star restaurants, no grand gestures." She squeezed his hands, her condition clear. "I want to get to know you, Anthony, not your money." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw pure, unadulterated vulnerability in the billionaire's eyes, a flicker of something close to fear. "I'm not sure I know how to do that," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "It's been a long time." Emily's heart melted. She tightened her grip on his hands, a silent promise. "Then," she said softly, "we'll figure it out together." As they finally parted ways for the night, a new, hopeful chapter beginning, neither of them noticed the sleek black car parked down the street. Inside, Victoria watched them, her phone to her ear, a chillingly calm smile playing on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "He's more invested than I thought," she murmured to the person on the other end. "We may need to accelerate the timeline." When Anthony arrived at her apartment door on Saturday afternoon, Emily almost didn't recognize him. The impeccably tailored suits were gone, replaced by a simple dark gray t-shirt that clung to his athletic frame and a pair of well-worn jeans. His hair was slightly tousled by the wind, and he was driving himself in a sleek but understated sports car, not a limousine in sight. He looked younger, more relaxed, and impossibly handsome. "Your order, ma'am," he said, a nervous, boyish grin on his face that completely melted her heart. One normal date. And it was. Normal, yet extraordinary. They spent the day doing things so mundane they felt magical. They wandered through a bustling street fair, a kaleidoscope of sounds and smells. Anthony, who was used to curated Michelin-starred meals, looked utterly fascinated as he ate a messy hot dog from a food truck, getting mustard on his chin, which Emily had to wipe away with a laugh. Their next stop was a sprawling second-hand bookstore, Emily's personal heaven. She lost herself among the towering shelves, the scent of old paper and ink like a familiar perfume. Anthony didn't rush her. He followed patiently, watching her with a quiet, intense fascination as she ran her fingers over worn spines and read passages aloud in a hushed, reverent whisper. He watched her come alive. When she turned around from a shelf of classic poetry, she found him at the counter, paying for a tall stack of books. They were all the ones she had lingered over, the ones she had picked up and reluctantly put back down. "Anthony, no!" she protested, rushing over. "That's too much." "That's not a normal date." "It is a normal date," he argued, a playful glint in his eye as he took the bags from the clerk. "Boyfriends buy their girlfriends presents." The words hung in the air, casual and yet monumental. Boyfriends, girlfriends. Emily froze, her heart doing a wild somersault in her chest. Anthony realized what he'd said at the same moment she did. A dark flush crept up his neck. I'm sorry," he stammered, the smooth, confident CEO completely vanishing, replaced by a flustered man. "I presumed too much. I just meant—" She silenced him with a kiss. It wasn't a desperate, world-altering kiss like the ones before. It was sweet and quick and perfect. It was a confirmation, an answer. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise and delight. That evening, he let her choose the restaurant. It was a tiny, family-run Italian place in her neighborhood, with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old wine bottles. As they were laughing over a shared plate of pasta, the elderly owner, Marco, bustled over to their table. "Anthony," he said, his eyes widening in recognition. "I haven't seen you in years. Not since—" He trailed off, his cheerful expression clouding over as a memory surfaced. "Not since you were just a boy coming in with your parents. Before the accident." The atmosphere at the table shifted instantly. The easy warmth evaporated, replaced by a sudden heavy tension. Anthony's posture stiffened, the light in his eyes dimming. Marco, sensing the profound discomfort, mumbled an apology and retreated to the kitchen. Emily waited, her hand resting near his on the table. She didn't push. Finally, Anthony spoke, his voice low and strained, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over her shoulder. "My parents died in a factory fire when I was 20, he said, the words stark and clinical. A fire that could have been prevented. The company they worked for cut corners on safety protocols to save a few $1,000s. He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was a raw, open wound. I built my empire to be the opposite of that. I built it on the principle that people, employees, customers, always come first. I wanted to build something that would have saved them." "That's why you work so hard," Emily whispered, a wave of understanding washing over her. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It's not an obsession, it's a mission. He looked visibly moved, as if she had just named a part of his soul he kept hidden from the world. He had never told anyone that, But before the profound intimacy of the moment could settle, Emily's phone buzzed violently on the table. It was her mother, her voice a frantic, hysterical torrent. "Emily, thank God. It's Marcus. He just left here. He was saying the most awful things, that you're being manipulated by some rich predator, that the family needs to intervene." Her mother was sobbing now. "He showed me these horrible tabloid articles about you and this Anthony Sinclair. They say he has a terrible reputation with women, that he leaves a trail of broken hearts. Emily, what have you gotten yourself into?" Emily looked up from the phone, her face pale. Anthony, who had clearly overheard every word, sat frozen, the raw vulnerability from moments ago replaced by a look of haunted, familiar pain. What didn't she know? The cheerful, warm atmosphere of the small Italian restaurant had vanished, replaced by a cold, suffocating silence. Emily's mother's panicked words still echoed in the air, a toxic cloud hanging over their table. Emily slowly lowered the phone, her hand trembling. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She wasn't looking at him with accusation, but with a desperate, pleading hope for him to deny it. Anthony looked as though he'd been struck. The profound, intimate connection they had just shared was shattered, and the haunted, guarded look was back in his eyes. He didn't flinch or look away, and that more than anything told Emily this was a real, painful part of his history. "What exactly did the tabloids say?" he asked, his voice strained, bracing himself. He paid the bill with a quiet efficiency, and the ride to her apartment was thick with an agonizing tension. Inside her small, cozy living room, which suddenly felt inadequate and fragile, he didn't make excuses. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with a grim resignation, and showed her. He typed his own name into the search bar. The results were a garish, sensationalized history of his life post-fortune. There were photos of him with a revolving door of beautiful, famous women. Headlines screamed about his latest conquest, his playboy lifestyle, and the string of broken hearts left in the wake of the billionaire bachelor. "After I made my first billion, the media created a character for me," he explained, his voice flat, weary from a fight he'd clearly been waging for years. "Every business meeting with a woman became a secret rendezvous. Every charity dinner I attended with a female colleague became a budding romance. It was a narrative. It sold papers." He looked up from the screen, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "The truth? In the last 5 years, I've had 2 serious relationships. They both ended for the same reason." He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "They fell in love with Anthony Sinclair, the man on the cover of these magazines. They wanted the lifestyle, the power, the public figure. They couldn't handle the actual man who works too much and carries too much baggage." She listened, her heart aching for him. She saw the truth in the exhaustion etched on his face. He wasn't a predator. He was prey, hunted by a public persona he couldn't escape. She believed him. She felt it in her gut. "I need some time," she said softly, not as a rejection, but as a genuine need to process, to separate the man in front of her from the myth. "I need to talk to my family." He nodded, though a look of barely concealed panic crossed his face. He had been here before. He knew this was the part where they pulled away. "Don't let them, or this." He gestured to the phone. "Decide what you feel for me, Emily. Please." He left, and the silence in her apartment was deafening. That night, alone in her bed, her phone rang from an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Emily? It's Victoria." The voice was smooth, polished, and dripping with false concern. "Listen, I know we didn't get off on the right foot, but as a woman, I feel I have to warn you. Anthony is a wonderful man, but he's a workaholic. He's married to his company. He'll promise you the world, but he'll never truly be there. We've all been down that road. Don't be another casualty." Emily hung up, a cold knot of doubt tightening in her stomach. Victoria's words were poison, cleverly designed to prey on the very fears Anthony had just confessed. For 3 days, she kept her distance. She needed to think. Anthony, true to his word, didn't pressure her. He sent a single text each morning. Thinking of you. I'm here when you're ready. It was respectful, patient, and it made her love him even more. On the third day, she was finally ready to call him, to tell him she was choosing him, not the ghosts of his past. But as she picked up her phone, a news alert flashed across the screen. Victoria Sterling promoted to COO of Sinclair Enterprises in surprise move. The article was accompanied by a photo from the press conference. Anthony and Victoria standing side by side, smiling professionally for the cameras. The comments section below the article was already buzzing with speculation about the power couple and their undeniable chemistry. A sharp, unfamiliar pang of jealousy shot through Emily. It was so intense it stole her breath. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated emotion, she realized the terrifying truth. She was in love with him, truly, deeply, and irrevocably in love. And it scared her to death. The realization that she was in love with him didn't bring Emily peace. It brought panic. Love was supposed to be comfortable, safe, like her relationship with Marcus had been. This felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in a hurricane. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. The news about Victoria's promotion, coupled with her own intense feelings, sent her spiraling into a vortex of insecurity. She was in the middle of a lecture on Pride and Prejudice, discussing Elizabeth Bennet's stubborn pride and Mr. Darcy's flawed prejudice, when the classroom door creaked open. Every head turned, and there he was. Anthony Sinclair stood in the doorway of her high school classroom, looking as out of place as a lion in a petting zoo. He was holding a ridiculously large bouquet of sunflowers, their bright, cheerful faces a stark contrast to the nervous, determined expression on his. He looked only at her, his gaze cutting through the sea of 30 curious teenage faces. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice, usually so commanding, now laced with a vulnerability that was utterly captivating. But I couldn't wait any longer. A wave of whispers and stifled giggles erupted from her students. Phones were surreptitiously raised, the moment too cinematic to go undocumented. Emily felt her face flush, a mixture of embarrassment and a deep, fluttering warmth. He walked toward her, his eyes never leaving hers, stopping just before her desk. He was laying himself bare, in the most public and uncomfortable way he could imagine, and he was doing it for her. "You asked me to be real," he began, his voice low and earnest, meant only for her, but overheard by everyone. "So here is the honest truth. I am terrible at this. I work too much. I have more baggage than an airport carousel. And I am scared to death of feeling the way I feel about you." He took a deep, shaky breath. "But you make me want to be better. You make me feel like I can just be me, not the man on a magazine cover. And I am not going to lose that. I am not going to lose you." Tears pricked at Emily's eyes. This wasn't a performance. This was a confession, delivered in the fluorescent-lit reality of her world. It was everything she needed to hear. "You have to talk to him after class, Ms. J," one of her bolder students whispered loudly. Emily let out a watery laugh, accepting the vibrant bouquet. "We need to talk," she agreed, looking at Anthony. "For real this time." After the final bell rang and her students had dispersed, buzzing with the gossip of the year, they went to a small, quiet cafe down the street. She finally voiced the fear that had been plaguing her. "Our worlds are so different, Anthony," she said, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "You're a billionaire who runs an empire. I'm a teacher who gets excited about finding a $20 bill in an old coat. What if I'm not enough for your world?" He reached across the table, his large, warm hands covering hers completely. "What if my world isn't enough for you?" he countered, his sincerity breathtaking. "You have a passion for what you do. You have purpose. You make a difference. Before you, my world was just boardrooms and balance sheets. You make me want to read poetry and eat messy food from a truck." You make me want to live, not just acquire. His honesty, so raw and real, dismantled the last of her defenses. The walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart came tumbling down. They agreed, in the quiet intimacy of the neighborhood cafe, to try. For real. No more doubts. No more holding back. They left the cafe hand in hand, an official, undisputed couple, the future stretching before them, bright and full of promise. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, they nearly collided with Marcus. He was with another woman, a girl who looked startlingly like a younger, less confident version of Emily. Marcus froze, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face before he masked it with a forced indifference. "Well," he said, his eyes darting from their joined hands to Anthony's face. "Looks like we've both moved on." But his eyes, when they met Emily's, betrayed him. They held a universe of regret. He was seeing for the first time how Anthony looked at her, with a reverence and adoration that he had never been capable of. Anthony, mature and secure, simply gave a curt nod and began to guide Emily away. But that night, as Emily was getting ready for bed, her heart full of a hopeful, soaring joy, an email with no sender appeared in her inbox. The subject line was a single chilling word: proof. Inside were several photos, clearly taken with a long-lens camera. They showed Anthony and Victoria at a hotel bar, laughing intimately. Another showed them entering an elevator together, late at night. They could be innocent, but they were framed to look like anything but. Below the photos was a single line of text: "He will never change. Save yourself while you still can." The digital glow of the phone screen was a toxic presence in the darkness of Emily's bedroom. It was 2 a.m. Beside her, Anthony slept, his breathing deep and even. It was the first time they had spent the entire night together, an act of quiet intimacy that had felt like a profound step forward. But now, that peace was shattered. She stared at the anonymous email, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The photos were expertly framed to tell a story of betrayal. Anthony and Victoria, heads close together at a dimly lit hotel bar, their laughter looking conspiratorial. Anthony and Victoria, stepping into an elevator alone, late at night. Logically, she knew they could be innocent moments ripped from their business context. But the seed of doubt, so maliciously planted by Victoria and her own father, was a stubborn, thorny weed. Her insecurities whispered that she was a fool to believe she could hold a man like him. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to the next photo. In her distress, her grip slipped, and the phone clattered from her hand onto the nightstand. The sound, sharp and loud in the silent room, was enough. Anthony stirred, his brow furrowing in his sleep before his eyes slowly opened. "Em," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Everything okay?" He blinked, adjusting to the dim light, and saw her face, illuminated by the phone's harsh glare. He saw the tears welling in her eyes, the look of profound hurt and confusion. He sat up immediately, all traces of sleep vanishing. "What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Wordlessly, she handed him the phone. He took it, his eyes scanning the screen. His reaction was instantaneous and visceral. A muscle in his jaw clenched. The concern on his face hardened into a cold, quiet fury. An anger she quickly realized was not directed at her, but at the anonymous sender. "This is a manipulation," he said, his voice low and tight, fully awake now. He began swiping through the photos, his anger growing with each one. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "This is a lie." He didn't wait for her to ask. He started explaining, his voice sharp with the need to dismantle the poison. "This hotel bar? It was in Las Vegas during a tech conference. The entire executive team was there, just out of frame. This elevator," he pointed to the screen, "goes to the rooftop restaurant where we were having a dinner meeting with investors. And Victoria," he let out a frustrated sigh, She's always been tactile. It's how she operates with everyone. It means nothing. Emily wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being screamed that the man who had brought her sunflowers in her classroom was telling the truth. But the insidious whisper of doubt remained. Why would someone do this, Anthony? Who hates us this much? His expression darkened. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a look of grim certainty. It's not about hating us, he said, his voice turning cold. It's about separating us, and I have a very good idea who's behind it. The next morning, he didn't just call Victoria. He told Emily he was going to her office and asked her to come with him. No more secrets, he said. You and I, we face this together. Victoria was in the middle of packing her office, her expression a mask of cool indifference when they walked in. I had a feeling I'd be seeing you, she said, not looking at Anthony but at Emily. The emails, Victoria, Anthony said, his voice leaving no room for games. Stop it. She initially denied it, a cool, practiced lie, but under the weight of his unwavering stare, she finally cracked, her composure shattered, replaced by a raw, wounded fury. You're throwing it all away, she exploded, her voice trembling with a passion Emily hadn't expected. Everything we built. For a high school teacher you've known for a few weeks. She doesn't understand our world, our mission. She will make you weak. Our world, Anthony countered, his voice dangerously quiet. No, my world. And Emily is the most important part of it now. The finality in his tone was absolute. Victoria looked at him, her face a mixture of heartbreak and rage. She snatched a letter from her desk and threw it at him. It was her resignation. Fine, she spat. But when he hurts you, and he will, remember that I warned you. She gave Emily one last, pitying look, then stormed out of the office, leaving a trail of broken ambition in her wake. Emily felt a surprising pang of pity for the other woman, but it was quickly overshadowed by a profound sense of relief. The threat was gone. They had faced it together, and they had won. But as they left the gleaming corporate tower, hand in hand, a new, more insidious ghost from the past was about to appear. Emily's phone rang. It was the principal from her school. Emily, her voice was hesitant and concerned. There's a man here to see you. He says he's your father. The words hit Emily with the force of a physical blow. Your father. A man who was less a person and more a ghost, a 2-decade-old wound that had never properly healed. Anthony, who was standing beside her, felt her go rigid, saw the color drain from her face. Emily, what is it? He asked, his voice laced with immediate concern. He's at my school, she whispered, the words feeling foreign and unreal on her tongue. My father. She found him waiting in the principal's office, a place she associated with misbehaving students, not long-lost parents. Robert Johnson was older, his hair thinner, his shoulders slumped with a weariness she didn't recognize. But the eyes were the same. They held a familiar, calculating glint that sent a chill down her spine. You have some nerve, she said, her voice a low, trembling hiss, foregoing any pretense of a happy reunion. Showing up here after 20 years. I know I'm in your debt, Emily, he began, his voice raspy, attempting a tone of remorse. Debt? She cut him off, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You don't have a debt. You have a void. You abandoned me. There isn't a debt large enough to fill that. He tried the emotional playbook she knew was coming. He claimed he'd been sick, that he'd been trying to find himself, that he had thought of her every single day. Each lie was a clumsy, transparent attempt to soften her, to find a crack in her armor. And for a heartbreaking second, a small, wounded part of her, the little girl who had waited by the window for a father who never came back, wanted to believe him, until he played his hand. I saw you in the news, he said, shifting in his chair. I hear your new boyfriend is a billionaire. Must be nice having someone who can take care of you. And your family. There it was. The reason. The motive. It wasn't remorse that had brought him here. It was opportunity. The news of her proximity to wealth had been a siren call to the man who had never cared for her, only for what she could provide. The nausea that rose in her throat was swift and acidic. "Get out," she said, her voice flat and dead. "Now, Emily, don't be like that," he started, but she stood up, her authority in this small room absolute. "Get out." He finally stood, his pathetic attempt at a loving reunion thwarted. But as he reached the door, he turned, the wheedling tone gone, replaced by a veiled threat. "You'll regret this. I'm still your father. I have rights." When Anthony found her back at the penthouse later that day, she was emotionally shattered. She told him everything, the story of her father's abandonment and his opportunistic return tumbling out of her in a torrent of pain and anger. Anthony's face hardened, his protective instincts flaring to life. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice a low growl as he reached for his phone. "My lawyers will issue a restraining order so fast his head will spin. He'll never bother you again." "No." The word was quiet, but it stopped him cold. He looked at her, surprised. "No," she repeated, her voice gaining strength. She stood up, wiping the tears from her face with a newfound resolve. "My whole life, men have either tried to save me or tear me down. Marcus made me feel small. You saved me from that humiliation. My father wants to use me. You want to protect me from him." She looked him straight in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "I need to do this myself. I need to prove to myself that I am strong enough to stand on my own 2 feet without being rescued." It was visibly difficult for him. The desire to protect her, to use his immense power to obliterate this threat, was a palpable force. But he saw the look in her eyes. He saw that this was not a rejection of him, but an affirmation of herself. With a slow, deliberate nod, he put his phone away. He was choosing to trust her strength, even when it terrified him. But as he watched her, a quiet, fierce pride mixing with his fear, he made a discreet call to his head of security. He would respect her wishes. He would let her fight her own battle. But he would be damned if he let her fight it unguarded. Robert, however, was not a man to be dismissed so easily. When his direct appeal failed, he went for the jugular. He went to the tabloids. The headline was a masterpiece of malicious fiction. Heartless billionaire Anthony Sinclair brainwashes girlfriend, turns her against ailing father. The story painted Anthony as a manipulative predator, and Emily as a naive, brainwashed gold digger, callously abandoning her dying father for a life of luxury. It was a vicious, calculated lie. As Emily stared at the article online, at the poison her own father was spewing into the world, a devastating thought took root. She wasn't just fighting her own battles anymore. She was dragging Anthony into them. His name, his company, his reputation, all of it was being tarnished because of her. The company's stock ticker, displayed on a news channel in the background, showed a sharp, downward trend. His partners would be questioning him. His board would be demanding answers. Maybe Marcus had been right. Maybe Victoria had been right. Maybe she didn't belong in this world. She was destroying him. Her fingers trembled as she picked up her phone, her heart pounding with a terrible, sickening certainty. She dialed his number. "We need to talk." The call connected. It was 3 a.m, an hour when the city was quiet and vulnerabilities were raw. "You're going to end this." It wasn't a question. Anthony's voice on the other end of the line was flat, heavy with a weary resignation that shattered Emily's heart. He had been expecting this call. He had been waiting for the weight of his world to become too much for her to bear. "No," she choked out, the word a tangled mess of tears and denial. "No, I'm asking if it's worth it." "For you." She paced her small apartment, the tabloid article still burning on her laptop screen. "Look what I'm doing to you, Anthony. Your company, your reputation. I'm ruining your life." The silence that followed was a physical entity, a vast, empty space that stretched across the phone lines. It was long enough for her to believe he was actually considering it, that she was right, that she was a liability he couldn't afford. "Stay right there," he said finally, his voice rough. "I'm coming over." 20 minutes later, they were standing on the rooftop terrace of his penthouse, the same spot where they had shared their first real vulnerable conversation. The city glittered below, a silent, indifferent witness to the chaos in their lives. "Is there pressure?" "Yes," he admitted, not trying to sugarcoat the reality. He leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The board is demanding answers. Our investors are nervous. The PR team is in full-blown crisis mode." He turned to face her, his expression serious, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "But if you're asking me if it's worth it," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense murmur as he closed the space between them. "The answer is yes. 1,000 times yes." He reached out, his hands framing her face, his touch both desperate and tender. "You are the only real thing in my life, Emily. Everything else is just noise." His words were a lifeline. She collapsed against him, tears of pure, unadulterated relief streaming down her face. He held her, his arms a fortress against the world. They weren't broken. They would fight this, together. Their decision to fight back was a brave one, but the execution was fraught with peril. Against Anthony's better judgment, he wanted to handle it with a team of ruthless lawyers and PR experts. Emily insisted on telling her own story. "I can't let them define me," she argued. "I won't be a victim in his narrative or a gold digger in theirs." She agreed to a single televised interview with a respected journalist. She sat under the bright, hot studio lights and told her truth. She spoke of the father who abandoned her, of her mother's struggle to raise her alone, of the man who reappeared only when he smelled money. She was poised, honest, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. The interview went viral, but the court of public opinion was a cruel and fickle beast. While many people rallied to her side, a vocal, vicious contingent emerged from the shadowy corners of the internet. They twisted her vulnerability into a calculated performance. They branded her a gold digger, an opportunist, someone who had concocted a sob story to snag a billionaire. The anonymous hate messages began to flood her social media. Then they escalated. Someone found her email address. Someone else found her school's phone number. The digital vitriol began to bleed into her real life, a constant, terrifying barrage of hatred. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Anthony, terrified for her safety, had been begging her to stay with him at the penthouse, where his security was absolute. Emily, fiercely protective of her independence, had stubbornly refused. But as she was leaving school, the principal intercepted her, her face pale with alarm. "Emily," she said, her voice trembling, "a package was delivered for you. It was unsettling. We've called the police." The package contained a single dead sunflower, its once bright face now withered and black. That night she packed a bag. The prideful fight for her independence felt foolish in the face of a threat so real and so ugly. She was moving into the penthouse, not as a guest or a girlfriend, but as a refugee seeking sanctuary. Forced into cohabitation under the most extreme pressure imaginable, living in a gilded cage while a storm of public hatred raged outside, their new, fragile love was about to face its most brutal test. They would either forge an unbreakable bond or shatter under the immense, crushing weight of it all. "I can't do this anymore." The scream ripped through the pristine, silent penthouse, raw and ragged. Emily stood in the middle of the vast living room, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Anthony had just called, his voice tight with apology, canceling yet another planned dinner. A critical PR meeting, a fire he couldn't delegate, had run late. Again. It wasn't just the dinner. It was the culmination of weeks of being trapped, of her life being shrunk to the four walls of this beautiful, sterile cage. It was the constant, low-grade fear, the feeling of being a prisoner in someone else's war. And his apology, however sincere, was the final spark on a dangerously short fuse. "Victoria was right," she yelled, the words tasting like poison as they left her mouth, but she couldn't stop them. "She was right about you. You're married to your work. You'll promise the world, but you'll never actually be here." The moment the words were out, a wave of instant, sickening regret washed over her. She had used another woman's bitter prediction as a weapon against him. The hurt that flashed across his face when he walked through the door, moments later, was more painful than any shouted retort could have been. "That's not fair, Emily," he said, his voice dangerously quiet as he dropped his briefcase by the door. "Fair?" she shot back, her frustration overriding her regret. "Is any of this fair, Anthony? I'm a prisoner in your home because my father is trying to ruin you. I can't go to work. I can't see my friends. I can't even go for a walk. The only thing I have to look forward to is seeing you, and you are never here." "You think this is easy for me?" he countered, his own control finally snapping. The exhaustion of the past few weeks was etched onto his face. "I have 10,000 employees whose livelihoods depend on the stability of this company, a stability that is being attacked from all sides. I can't just drop everything." "I'm not asking you to drop everything," she cried, tears of pure frustration streaming down her face. "I'm asking for you to choose me, just once. I'm asking to feel like a priority, not another crisis to be managed." They threw words like stones, each one aimed to wound, each one born of the immense pressure that was crushing them both. They weren't fighting about a canceled dinner. They were fighting about their fears, their insecurities, their clashing worlds. Finally, needing to escape the crossfire, Anthony grabbed his keys. "I need some air," he bit out, and walked out, the soft click of the door echoing the sound of something breaking between them. Emily collapsed onto the sofa, alone in the cavernous, silent apartment, the weight of her own words pressing down on her. She was questioning everything. Hours later, the penthouse was still dark. She was curled up on the couch when her phone, which she'd left on the coffee table, lit up with an unexpected call. A number she didn't recognize. On a whim, she answered. "Emily, my name is Anthony Sinclair." The voice on the other end was elegant but fragile, laced with a deep maternal sadness. "I'm Anthony's mother." Emily sat bolt upright, her mind reeling. Your mother? But Anthony told me. He said you were gone." There was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "I understand why he would say that. It's easier than the truth." The woman's voice trembled. "When my husband died, I fell apart. I couldn't handle the grief. I couldn't handle watching my son try to hold the world together on his own. So I left. I abandoned him when he needed me most. I am a coward, my dear. But I've been watching from a distance." Her voice grew urgent. "He loves you more than he has loved anyone since he lost his father. Please don't let him destroy himself again. He's drowning in his work because it's the only thing that has never left him. You are the first person in years who has made him want to truly live again. Don't give up on him." When Anthony returned, his face pale and drawn, Emily was waiting. She didn't yell. She just looked at him, her expression soft with a new, painful understanding. "I spoke to your mother," she said quietly. The carefully constructed walls of Anthony Sinclair, the billionaire titan, crumbled into dust. He sank onto the sofa opposite her, burying his face in his hands, as a ragged, soul-deep sob was torn from his chest. He told her everything. The crushing grief, the profound betrayal of being abandoned by his remaining parent, the way he had poured every ounce of his being into his work to numb the unbearable pain. "I'm so afraid of losing you," he finally whispered, his voice broken, tears tracking down his face. It was the first time she had ever seen him cry. I'm so terrified of messing this up that I'm losing you anyway." She moved to sit beside him, to wrap her arms around him, to begin the process of mending what they had broken. But before she could, his phone buzzed violently on the table. It wasn't a text. It was a high-priority emergency alert from his company. His face went ashen as he read it. "Oh my God," he breathed. "There's been an accident, a structural collapse at the main processing plant." He looked at her, his eyes wide with horror. "People are hurt. I have to go. Now." He stood up, the CEO mask snapping back into place out of pure reflex. But his hands were shaking. He was a man on the verge of shattering completely, being pulled back into the one crisis he knew how to manage, leaving the one he didn't, them, behind. And Emily had a choice to make: stay in the safety of the penthouse or walk with him into the heart of the storm. Anthony was already halfway to the door, his mind a frantic whirlwind of emergency protocols and damage control, when he felt a small, firm hand slip into his. He stopped, turning in surprise. Emily stood beside him, her expression calm and resolute. She had her coat on, and her purse slung over her shoulder. "I'm going with you," she said. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement of fact. "Emily." "No," he argued, his voice strained. "You don't have to. It's going to be a chaotic scene. It could be dangerous. This is my responsibility." "No," she countered, her grip on his hand tightening, a silent anchor in his storm. "This is what people who love each other do. They show up." Her eyes, clear and unwavering, held his. "So, I'm showing up." For the first time in hours, Anthony felt his lungs fill with air. The frantic panic in his chest eased, just slightly. He wasn't alone in this. He gave her hand a grateful, desperate squeeze and led her to the elevator. The scene at the factory on the outskirts of the city was one of organized chaos. Flashing lights of ambulances and fire trucks cut through the darkness. Dust and the acrid smell of burnt wiring hung heavy in the air. But through the pandemonium, Emily saw a side of Anthony Sinclair the world never saw. He wasn't the detached CEO in a boardroom. He was on the ground, his suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up. He moved with a purpose that was both compassionate and commanding. He knew the names of the foremen, asking for specific updates on their teams. He spoke to the families of the injured, his voice gentle, his eyes filled with a genuine, gut-wrenching empathy. He didn't just promise the best medical care, he arranged it, his phone a direct line to the top specialists in the country. This wasn't PR. This was a man moving heaven and earth for his people. Watching him, Emily felt a profound, overwhelming wave of love. This was the man he had built his company to be, the man who ensured no other family would suffer the way his had. His work wasn't an obsession that pulled him away from her. It was the very core of his being, the mission that made him the man she loved. The initial investigation into the collapse revealed a horrifying truth. It wasn't an accident. Key structural supports had been deliberately tampered with. It was sabotage, a malicious act designed to cripple his company and destroy his reputation. The immediate suspects were obvious: disgruntled competitors, or perhaps a vengeful Victoria Sterling. But then, a week later, the lead investigator delivered the final, sickening twist. The saboteur had been caught on a hidden security camera, accepting a briefcase full of cash. It was Robert Johnson. He had been paid by a rival corporation to create a series of escalating scandals, culminating in this disastrous act of industrial sabotage. The tabloid stories, the public harassment, the accident, it was all connected. It all led back to her father. The guilt that crashed over Emily was suffocating. Her father, her blood. He had tried to destroy the man she loved. She felt tainted, responsible. "This is my fault," she whispered to Anthony that night, her voice hollow. "All of this. It's because of me." Anthony pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he could physically absorb her pain. "No, he said fiercely, his voice a low, protective growl against her hair. "Do not say that. You are not responsible for his choices. You are only responsible for yours." He pulled back to look her in the eyes, his own gaze clear and certain. "And you chose to stay with me. You chose to walk into the fire with me." He gave her a small, sad smile. "That is the only thing that matters." Robert was arrested. The full story, with its sordid details of corporate espionage and familial betrayal, came to light. Public opinion, once so viciously against them, swung dramatically in their favor. They were no longer a scandalous couple. They were sympathetic victims who had weathered an unimaginable storm. But Emily felt no sense of victory. She felt empty, the final toxic tie to her father now severed forever, leaving behind a scar that would never fully fade. Seeing the lingering pain in her eyes, Anthony made a decision. He walked into his office the next day and did something he hadn't done in 8 years. He cleared his calendar. He came home that evening and found her staring out at the city lights. "Run away with me," he said softly. She turned, confused. "Just for a little while," he elaborated, taking her hands. "Let's go somewhere no one knows our names, somewhere we can just be us. No companies, no families, no ghosts." His eyes pleaded with her. "I need to prove to you, and to myself, that I know how to choose you, truly choose you." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. It was the grandest gesture of all, not because it involved money, but because it involved the one thing he never gave away, his time. "Yes," she whispered. But as she agreed, she knew there was one last thing she had to do before she could truly be free. One last ghost to face, on her own terms. The visitor's room at the county jail was a cold, sterile place that smelled of antiseptic and regret. Emily sat on a hard plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and waited. She hadn't wanted to come. A part of her wanted to board a plane with Anthony and never look back. But a deeper, quieter part knew that true freedom wouldn't be found in a Tuscan villa, but here, in this joyless room, by closing this final, painful chapter herself. When Robert was led in on the other side of the thick glass partition, he looked smaller, diminished. The calculating glint in his eyes was gone, replaced by the dull, defeated look of a man who had lost everything. He picked up the phone receiver, his hands trembling slightly. He tried to apologize. The words were clumsy, hollow, and laced with self-pity. He blamed his debts. He blamed the rival company for preying on his desperation. He blamed a world that had been unfair to him. He never once took full responsibility. Emily listened in silence, her expression unreadable. She let him exhaust his litany of excuses. And when he finally fell silent, she didn't yell. She didn't cry. She spoke with a calm, quiet finality that was more devastating than any rage could have been. "I forgive you," she said. He looked up, a flicker of surprised hope in his eyes. "Not because you deserve it," she clarified, her voice steady and clear, "but because I deserve peace. I have spent my entire life haunted by the ghost of the father you could have been. I have let your absence define me, and I'm done." She leaned forward slightly. "You will not have that power over me anymore. This is the last time we will ever speak." She stood to leave. "Emily, wait," he called out, his voice cracking. Do you really love him?" She paused at the door and looked back at the man who was her father, only in biology. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. "More than you could ever possibly understand," she said softly. And then she walked out, leaving the ghost of her past behind for good. She felt a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying lift from her shoulders. As she was leaving the facility, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Victoria. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but could we please talk? Just for 5 minutes?" Against her better judgment, Emily agreed to meet her at a nearby coffee shop. Victoria looked different without her power suits and corporate armor. She looked tired. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Victoria began, stirring her coffee with nervous energy. "What I did was unforgivable. I was in love with him for years, or at least I thought I was. I was in love with the idea of being his partner, in business and in life." She finally looked up, her eyes filled with a surprising sincerity. "But I watched you two. I saw the way he looked at you that night at the gallery, the way he looks at you now." She shook her head, a sad, self-aware smile on her face. "He never once looked at me like that. What you two have, it's the real thing. I just wanted to say, I hope you'll be happy." Emily was speechless. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an admission. It was a surrender. It was closure she didn't even know she needed. She found Anthony waiting for her back at the penthouse, his bags packed by the door. She told him about both conversations, about the weightlessness she felt after forgiving her father, about Victoria's unexpected concession. He listened, a look of immense pride on his face. He was in awe of the strong, compassionate woman she had become. The next day, they were at the private airfield, waiting to board the jet that would whisk them away from their chaotic world. The plane was ready, the Tuscan sun was waiting, but Anthony was uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with his watch, his knee bouncing. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, taking his hand. "You seem anxious." He looked at her, his green eyes wide with an emotion she couldn't quite place. He gave her a shaky smile. "Perfect," he said, his voice not entirely convincing. "Everything is perfect." But as he looked at the plane, then back at her, she knew this trip was about more than just a vacation. It was the start of their forever, and the thought was as terrifying and wonderful for him as it was for her. Tuscany was a dream painted in gold and green. The air smelled of cypress trees and sun-baked earth. For 2 weeks, they were not Anthony Sinclair, the billionaire CEO, and Emily Johnson, the teacher who had survived a public scandal. They were just Anthony and Emily. They explored ancient, sun-drenched villages where no one knew their names, got lost on winding country roads, and drank cheap, delicious wine with local farmers. He saw the world through her eyes, marveling at the way she found beauty in the smallest details, the intricate pattern of a wrought iron gate, the vibrant color of a wildflower growing in a crack in the stone. She saw a side of him that no one else did, the relaxed, playful man who laughed freely, who wasn't carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders. Here, in the heart of Italy, they fell in love all over again, a quieter, deeper love, built not on chaos and survival, but on shared joy and peaceful intimacy. On their last night, Anthony took her to a small, family-run trattoria perched on a hill overlooking a valley of sunflowers. They sat at a secluded table on the terrace, the setting sun casting a warm, golden glow over everything. "I could live like this forever," Emily sighed, her head resting contentedly on his shoulder as they shared a bottle of Chianti. "Then let's do that," Anthony replied, his voice soft, but with an undercurrent of seriousness that made her lift her head and look at him. After dinner, he led her by the hand to a scenic overlook at the edge of the village. The Tuscan landscape spread before them like a masterpiece. "I wrote a speech," he began, his voice shaky, a nervous energy radiating from him that was both endearing and completely out of character. He laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. "I practiced it in the mirror, but now that you're here, all I can think is, my life was black and white before I met you, Emily." He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. "You walked into my life and brought color. You brought poetry and messy food trucks and a purpose beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. You showed me what a home feels like. You loved me for the man I was, not the name I carried." With a deep breath that did little to steady him, he slowly got down on one knee. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, a soft gasp escaping her lips as tears instantly flooded her eyes. "I know this was fast," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked up at her, his heart in his eyes. I know our path here was chaotic and paved with more drama than a Shakespearean play. But I also know, with a certainty that fills every part of my being, that I want to spend every single day of the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve. He opened a small, velvet box. Inside, nestled against the dark fabric, was a ring. It was a stunning, vintage-inspired design with a delicate, intricate band, a perfect echo of a design she had once sketched in the margins of a notebook. He had remembered. "Emily Johnson," he said, his voice breaking. "You make me want to be a better man. You make me believe in happiness. Will you marry me?" She was crying too hard to speak, so she just nodded frantically, her whole body shaking with joy. "Yes," she finally managed to whisper, the word a sob of pure, unadulterated happiness. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. As he stood and pulled her into his arms, their kiss was met with a smattering of applause from a few local villagers who had been watching the beautiful, universal scene unfold. 6 months later, the wedding was not the grand society event everyone expected. It was an intimate affair held in the sun-dappled garden of a historic estate, attended only by their closest friends and family. Emily's mother was there, her face glowing with a happiness her daughter had never seen. And across the aisle, in a surprising gesture of reconciliation, sat Anthony's mother, Eleanor, her eyes filled with a quiet, tearful pride as she watched her son finally find his peace. Later, at the reception, as the sun set and fairy lights began to twinkle in the trees, Emily stood for a moment, just taking it all in. The laughter, the music, the love that filled the air. She remembered that night at Élysée, the crushing humiliation, the feeling that her world was ending. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Sinclair?" Anthony murmured into her hair. She had kept her own name for her writing, but she secretly loved the sound of his. She laughed and turned in his arms to face him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I was just thinking," she said, her eyes sparkling, "that the best moment of my life began on the night I thought it was all over." She reached up and cupped his face, her love for him shining in her eyes. "I was thinking that sometimes you have to be left so you can finally be found." He smiled, a slow, beautiful smile filled with all the promises of their future, and kissed her. They danced under the stars, two souls who had found each other in the wreckage, and for the first time in their tumultuous lives, both Anthony and Emily were completely, perfectly home.